Alrighty, so on to the bishop d3 variations. Now we are entering the deepest, darkest forests of Sveshnikov mainline theory. So we kick the knight, we retake on f6 with the g, we get a knight on d5, we f5 it, and we get a bishop d3 as a response. This is the main line. However, after bishop e6, the most thematic response, we are not going to look at the biggest main line yet with castles, but in this chapter we are going to actually discuss the alternatives here on move 12. So the point of bishop e6 is that for the time being we deny ef5 by hitting the knight on d5, and white at this point has various responses beside the mainline castle. These responses are c4, queen h5, and c3, and we are going to go through them exactly in this order. c4 is a really minor sideline that poses no problems whatsoever. We just go check, thank you very much, and we are already happy as Larry, as we like to say it in Australia. Queen d2 is forced, take, bishop h6, and now we simply play rook c8, getting ready to eliminate the knight on d5 and hop in on to d4. For example, ef, taki, knight d4, and we have got a very good looking position where our knight is better than theirs, our bishop is better than theirs, and remember, white has lost castling rights. So connecting the rooks is going to be quite troublesome for white. Not so much for us because king e7 is doing the trick. So yes, we are down a pawn, and yes, we also prefer to be black here. Easy peasy. The really exciting and fun challenge here is queen to h5. This actually used to be a very popular move alongside kingside castle, almost same frequency in terms of occurrence, and it is a really fun line, so I cannot wait to present it to you, especially because our chosen line here is the sharpest one out there, which is going to be the super combative, tactical, and dynamic rook to g8. Bishop g7, and I think f4 are also playable moves here. But rook g8 is definitely a ticket to the party, and that party is now going to kick off in earnest. So let's have a look-see at what white can do here. c3, castles, and g3. Of these moves, of course, g3 is the only one that really deserves serious merit. Maybe castle to some degree. c3 is definitely not it. It just ignores the threat, and we are more than happy to cash in. In fact, the idea is to double attack rook and pawn on f5, but this is not going to cut it. We pull the rook back to g4, takes. It's actually a little bit counterintuitive, so you need to remember here to bring the rook to g4. It's counterintuitive because after takes now the rook is hanging, as is the bishop. But since bishop d5 hits the rook on h1, the fact that the g1 rook is now under attack is perfectly irrelevant. Queen takes and knight e7. This is our key move. Kicking the queen from d5, facilitating the d5, e4 roll of the pawns. Queen b7, still trying to be cheeky and tactical. Knight takes b5 is now a dangerous threat, but not anymore. Bishop g7, now after knight b5, a bishop b5, we simply walk. And other than that, we are threatening d5, e4, rook b8, b4, all kinds of nasty threats are available to us. And note that a lot of people, when they see this rook g8 idea, they kind of get scared that, whoa, so now we can't castle anywhere. Well, that's true, but when you think about it a bit more deeply, you realize that in almost every single line, neither can white. Like here, kingside castle is illegal, and queenside castle is gonna be absolutely be swept off the board with rook b8, b4, e4, and boy, wow. And good luck for that white king to survive on the queen side. So as much as, yes, rook g8 does give up castling rights for black to the king side, it also does generate a lot of problems for white, which means that, for example, if they castle, then, yeah, fair enough, they castle, we didn't, but we have a g-file, which is looking very promising Indeed. And now we are going after the king with f4. We have seen this motif. Not only are we putting potential f3 on the map, but bishop g4 as well. h3, preventing bishop g4, rook g5. And now black has got two choices. Queen takes h7 or the tactical knight c7. If queen takes, we go to g6. This is a very important motif to remember. The idea is that we want to trap the queen, typically by means of queen g5, hitting mate, and no matter how they defend it, then rook h6 traps the queen. Not bad. So queen h5, and now rook h6. And it turns out that now the white king is fatally exposed to the mercy of our invading army. The queen has to go back to d1 all the way. Either of these two moves would have been just hit by knight d4, an extra tempo, an extra attacker. But even here, bishop takes h3 is already decisive. Take queen h4, and white has nothing to do against the imminent queen h3 other than queen g4, which allows us to win the house. That demonstrates that sometimes leaving your king in the middle is a safer choice than casting into an open file. Right, so if knight c7 instead of queen h7, cheeky little move, then we just sidestep it. Queen is hanging after all. Take, we take back. Now the check on f7 is useless because we can block it with the bishop on e7, no problems at all. So the queen goes back home again, rook g6. A really, really cool move. I like this a lot. The idea being that the rook on g5 is actually obstructing the view of the queen. So now we can entertain both queen g5 and queen h4 ideas. c3, queen h4, king h2 only to stop this. Bishop e7 and Lord save white from the upcoming rook g8, bishop d8, bishop b6, all kinds of carnage is incoming. And again, by the way, very clearly, even though our king is uncastled, it is a lot safer than the white king on h2. Okay, so castles really wasn't it either. So the most sensible move for white is to just altogether stop this nonsense and play g3. Now we go after the queen, and the queen has choices. If the queen captures on h7, then we go knight d4. And again, now we are going to look at a variety of variations. Obviously, knight d4 threatens with knight f3 check. So we have got c3, kind of provoking the threat, or queenside castles. If c3, check, king e2, take. If king d takes, then you just simply pull back, and d5 next is absolute carnage. So take on d5 is forced, e4, h4, and rook g6. And yes, they can kick us one more time, but that's gonna be it. Now the bishop is hanging, and we have got a super cute, ever so slightly long-winded, but in my opinion, more or less unstoppable plan to trap the queen, which is gonna look something like this. The bishop drops back here, we play queen f6, we play king d7, we play bishop e7, and we play rook h8. In the end of that, hitting the queen, trapping the queen. Really feisty, aggressive Sveshnikov chess, the way we like it. So, castles. Castles is obviously the best way to deal with the problems. And for the first time, it doesn't appear immediately obvious that the white king is still a potential subject to tactics, but bear with me. Rook g6, the usual cheeky queen trap in mind. If ef, rook h6. And now if they sack the queen, then we are going to have a really, really fun attacking scenario. Watch this. Bishop takes rook, queen a5. Now b4 is a game-winning threat. So c3, and we still go b4. Note that this hits the knight on d5. And so they are forced to take on b4 with the knight. And now comes the second wave of the tactic. Check, and boomski, knight takes c3. Relentless, absolutely brutal attack against the king, which is seemingly really well protected by the knights. But as it turns out, those knights are pretty clumsy and poorly defended, really. So BC now drops the a3 knight, and king takes c3 drops the b4 knight. And black breaks through with a vicious attack. Right, so after rook g6 back, white is best advised to run for the hills and play queen h4. We trade, and we go in. And again, this endgame looks absolutely marvelous for us. The white pawns on the king side are catastrophic sight. 3 isolated pawns. Rook c8 is coming, bishop h6 is coming. We can also play bishop g7 and e4. And the knight on a3 is a tragic sight. We are doing great. And so, the final big variation or branch is that after rook g8, g3, rook g5, white doesn't go greedy with queen h7, but drops back immediately to d1. And now the onus is on us to prove that, we have got some play, and prove we shall. Takes, and knight e7. Now, this structure is going to be the very core of the next chapter. So it's very handy that we are now going to begin familiarize ourselves with this scenario. My general take on these types of positions is that I was going to say it's always bad for white, but maybe that's a bit of a stretch. I will flip it around and I will say it's never bad for us. Never. And the reason for that is because despite appearances, our bishop, at least in my understanding, our dark squared bishop has greater future than white's light squared bishop does. And because of that, and the imbalance because of we have opposite colored bishops, whoever has meaningful threats on the color complex of their bishops typically tends to pull ahead. Let me demonstrate. Bishop e2, defending the pawn on d5, but this is a timid-looking move. Bishop h6. c4. Stockfish top choice, by the way. Queen a5 check. King f1. b4 and e4. This is the idea I'm talking about. We are now restricting the e2 bishop, and at the same time, we are opening up a vitally important diagonal for the bishop, and we are going to have a jolly good time in this game. Note that additionally to bishop g7, pawn push to f4 is also a very annoying idea to eke out some very dangerous kingside attack. Black is definitely doing fine here. To be honest, bishop e2 was a very passive move. Knight b5 is, on the other hand, a typical resource. Once again, we are going to see this idea in the next line. Here is a game, queen b6, knight a3. This was played in Polgar Leko, a Hungarian encounter from 2003. But before I go into that, let's have a look-see at what happens if the knight retreats to c3. e4 again, bishop c4, queen b2, knight e2, queen b4, queen d2. And it almost looks like an awkward scenario where we just can't win the bishop because of the rook is on. But no worries, we trade queens, we play bishop h6, and with the f4 advance pending and d5 also then hanging, we prefer black in this endgame scenario. So back to the Polgar Leko game. Knight a3, queen b2, knight c4, queen check, king f1. And here comes an absolutely brilliant idea that at first sight looks very, very hairy, but in fact, it's a really, really cool concept. e4. We allow the d6 pawn to fall with check, and we even allow knight takes f7 with a tempo. But in the end of the day, the white pieces are hanging. Queen b1. This is the main idea. Queen b7 check is looking to pick up a piece. So we take d5, queen b7, and king e6. Absolute wild, utter chaos. Note that, yes, our rook is hanging, but so is theirs. And they have 2 minor pieces hanging on top of that. So rook d1 is more or less forced, and the entire variation I'm showing you here is completely forced. Bishop takes e4, only move for white, takes, knight h6, queen f3, and now we are going to settle for a perpetual check. Quite a wild variation, but we had to go to e5. We can't go back to the 7th rank because then this would hang with check. And after king e5, there is nothing better than check, king back. And yeah, they don't have access to these squares, so the perpetual check will decide the game. One more time, because this was a very, very wild line. So b5, sorry, knight takes b5, queen b6, knight a3, we take b2, we then check, and then we let d6 go. Yeah? And then we even let the queen in, because their rook is hanging. And in the end of this variation, we can agree to a perpetual check. All right, so that was knight b5. And the final line of this big batch is going to be c3. We again put the bishop on h6. Note that we don't want to put the bishop on g7, or rather we do want to do that, but we can't, because oftentimes h4 is very awkward when we have to pull the rook back to g6, sometimes weakening f5. So for the time being, bishop on h6 is the name of the game. 2 main lines, bishop e2 and knight c2. If knight c2, e4. Bishop f1. Makes sense to drop back all the way, since now the bishop can recover, or rather come back to g2. King f8, stepping out of all kinds of dirt, securing the king, opening up the e5 for the heavies. a4, f4. Time to go for it. Note that f4 almost always attacks d5. gf, rook d. Queen g4, rook c5. And yeah, we just want to send it. d5 is good to go. And yeah, potentially bishop back to g7 and break on the dark squares is our long-term plan. Looks good to me. If bishop e2 in this position, then we go queen b6. Optimal place for the queen in these variations, by the way, hitting the diagonal, potentially occasionally threatening b4. It just looks great. Knight c2, king f8, same old, same old. Now, if they castle, surprise, surprise, f4. Note that this already hangs g3, because the f2 pawn is pinned. So now we're threatening to take. Queen d3, take, and rook e8. Obviously, we don't care about the hanging pawn on h7, as now we have rook g3, rook back g6, and that queen is now feeling the heat. Bishop h5, rook g7, takes, knight g8, queen e3, queen d8, and according to the fish that dominates the chess world, black is doing more than fine here. Queen h4 threatened, rook h7 threatened, pawn e4, rook e5 is on the map. We're down a piece and we are having all the fun in this position. The entire line is absolutely crazy. I'll go for it one more time because it's just madness. Absolute madness. And black is up a pawn with a winning endgame. All right, let's do this again because that was absolutely crazy city. So we went bishop e2, queen b6, knight c2, king f8, and here the main line is going to be a4, and castles was this fantastic idea where we go like, okay, man, f4, it's game on. Let's bring it. Rook e8, developing the rook. Very picturesque, nice chess by us, by the way. Like we are playing it by the book. Knight G8 and just go after Queen H4. So good. And now pick up the H5 is going to be accomplished by the heavies. E4, of course, is threatening Rook E5. And the knight is in no position to come to the rescue because the bishop is a different circuit from the knight. So Rook G4 first, Rook E5, and now Queen Saccarino winning everything back and getting that extra pawn ending, or rather getting an endgame ending with an extra pawn. What's then what not to love? By the way, the engine thinks it's equal, but up a pawn, I will take black every day of the week. Right, so what does A4 look like, you ask? No worries. We go take, and here we have got two knight moves. Knight E3, which makes no sense. No, I'm kidding. But really, it doesn't seem to respond to the problem, which is the hanging B2 pawn. So we take castles, take knight C4, and now what really, really has to hurt us super big time, else we are just too many pawns to the good. Rook G6, Rook A4, F4. Queen B1, FG. HG. Now we already have a perpetual check on G3, but King G7 is our chosen move because we claim that White's compensation for the pawn is not that apparent. And I definitely feel that that is the case. So just up a pawn and I'm not seeing it. So yeah, why not? So knight b4 obviously is the sensible choice. We have seen it in previous variations. E4 now, and two captures on a4. This is going to be now the main line of this batch, and I love this endgame scenario that you're about to see. But let me show you first Rook a4. We hit with f4 again. This is something that you really want to remember as a concept, that it seems so just slow and tedious, but as a matter of fact, after Rook a4, f4 is always putting the heat on this pawn on d5. I know that the knight is guarding it with b4 now, but a5 can come as well. So yeah, and now those kingside pieces, it's just, I don't know, it's a Sveshnikov special that no matter how many pieces we trade off, somehow we always manage to drum up very nasty play on the king side. Look at that. E3 is pending to just absolutely rip them apart. Castles, of course, is not playable because the pin on the f2 pawn means that we just pick up g3. And after takes rook g2, like we have got so many threats, it's not funny. Queen f2, pawn e3, bishop f4, knight h4, knight f3. This looks like it's knockout. You know, the towel is flying to the ring from the opponent's coach at this point because they want to prevent further bodily harm caused to their advocate. Fair enough. So, Queen a4 is the name of the game. F4 again, same old, same old. Queen a5, they're begging for a queen trade. We go like, not yet. They take, we go Queen a7. Interesting staircase movement there. Now, obviously, the bishop is pinned. The queen on a7 is quite annoying. So Queen a3 is played in order to release the bishop from the pin. We are now going to play Queen c5, excuse me. Knight c6, and that's when the queens come off. And I'm excited because this endgame scenario is really, really cool. So watch this. Queen c5, yeah? d5 is under attack. e3 is still pending. You know the drill. So knight c6 trying to, once again, provoke the trade. And we go like, fine, you can have it. And we enter this endgame. Now we are threatening to win a piece with rook c6. So castles is forced. f3. Bishop b7. Trade. And f5. And level material, but they have no king. And they will not have a king, in fact, for the rest of the game, because king f1 can always be very strongly met by bishop d2, completely shutting the king in. And right now, actually, king f1 would be effectively met by rook b5 and rook takes b2. So white has a plethora of problems to solve here. And we are looking to have a very, very fun endgame indeed. And that concludes this first batch of this chapter with c4 and queen h5. And now, if I press the correct button, which is going to be this one, we are going to look at the main lines of this section with 12 c3. So c3 it is. That's where the final main line is going to come in this particular variation. However, even after c3, we are going to branch away to various moves and, in fact, even various structures. So bishop g7 is played, logical, developing, preparing castles. And here queen h5 is the biggest main line. But I need to show you this idea, knight takes b5, because this is something that pops up in other variations as well. Instead of going for that cheeky sacking the bishop and then bring the knight in and then check and chase the king business, this, in my opinion, actually has a more serious but far deeper concept and threat behind it, which is to cause discomfort, simplify the position, kill all the tactics on black side, and then try to pursue this agenda with pushing the queenside pawns as far as they can go. So this is to be respected. Rook c8 is our best course of action when there is knight b4 and queen a4. Knight b4 is met by bishop d7. We have to, more or less. Queen d6, knight b4, queen b4. And as you can see, it's now difficult to say, and I'm not going to, that we have got an awful lot of attacking potential. It is now going to just simply come down to being a piece up and trying to consolidate the position, which, by the way, is also not quite that simple, since now here we are we are being cut off from castling, so we need to fix that. But now there is a very awkward pile-up on the d-file, which we just barely manage by a cheeky counterpin on the b. Bishop d7, queen d7, and now white is more or less forced to trade down into this endgame. If the opt to keep the queens on, you can defend d6 by king e7 or rook b6, and then actually we might obtain some attacking chances. So white is best advised to trade. And we have seen these endgame scenarios, or similar at least, where white has seemingly way too many pawns, but the reality is that the remaining black pieces are viciously active. And so now it's only 3 pawns, and f2 is now a major weakness. And in the end, I think this is going to fizzle out into a draw-ish endgame, but it's very clear that we can't possibly lose this. So we are either going to win this or it's going to be a draw, but it's not losable for black. So this is a dangerous business. You need to know this line really, really well. And also note that here queen a4 is also a very valid try by white. Bishop d7, ef5, castles. Castles and e4. Not only are we down 3 pawns already, but we casually throw away a 4th in order to increase piece activity. I think this is a very, very nice example of a positional pawn sacrifice, which is actually badly needed in order to create some realistic play, to breathe fresh life into the position. Now, knight e5 can come in. The bishop has an extended diagonal, so good stuff overall. 2 moves for white. If they grab the pawn immediately, we also get to activate the rook. Queen a4 back, rook e5. Rook d1, rook f5. And of course, that was a brilliant trade in terms of giving up the e4, the f pawns, because now both bishops are active, the rook is active. We are looking pretty healthy here. Queen c2, and here we have got a beautiful tactic to exploit the weakness of the b5 bishop, knight d4. 97 check, counter tactic, king h8, counter tactic. The queen is hanging, so they can't take the rook. Rook d4, rook b5. Now we're just about to get Anastasia mated on h7, but luckily we have a bishop on g7 rather than a pawn. Otherwise, queen takes h7 would have been very embarrassing. As is, we can handle the mate threat. We can handle the mate threat, I said. And ta-da. We are up a piece. the kingside disturbance and nuisances are over. And with the two bishops and the active rooks, I would say that we are cruising toward victory here. So perhaps better is to not to accept this pawn push for white right away, but to play rook e1, maintaining tension. Knight e5, trade, take e4 now, knight f6, and again trading everything down seems to be the best choice. There was a game with knight e7, which appears to be better than knight f6, which is our main line. Yeah, this end game is not going to be a lot of fun. I don't think that we are worse, but here it's definitely white who is going to have the more enjoyable game, at least for a while. Knight f6 was played in a game, in correspondence game that was drawn, agreed here. The position is now, I think, more or less completely balanced. I prefer this than the one I showed you before. So probably 97 does cause a bit of a headache. A good news is that this line is not particularly popular, so it's unlikely that we are going to see it too often. Okay, so that was the knight b5 sack. And with that, now we are moving on to the main batch with queen h5. So this is white's typical agenda. Bring the queen to the king side. Try to exert pressure on h7, f5, and in general, try to be a fly in the ointment. I want to make it sure that you understand that queen h5 is not an attacking move per se. And white, in fact, doesn't really have an agenda to attack, not only an agenda, but an opportunity even to attack us on the king side. What it is basically a set of preventative measures to take the sting out of our potential kingside attack. It's very important that we understand this. So our answer is castles. And now we are going to look at three big lines, and they are going to be very, very different in nature. The first one is going to be knight c2, the second one is going to be castles, and the third one, the main line, is going to be ef. Let's begin with knight c2. Now, this doesn't put any pressure on us, and now we can carry out one of our favorite operations in the Sveshnikov when we take on e4, and then we replace the pawn on f5 with another pawn on f5. Now, whenever you do this, you need to remember that we have a few unguarded pieces, and so tactics are around. And knight f4 does look like a problem. As a matter of fact, when I played this line in my youth with the white pieces, I was under the impression that this whole idea of taking on e4 and playing f5 was not playable due to this tactic. I believe Spassky even had a game in this. But engines overturned this evaluation entirely, and it turns out that after knight f4, white is in a lot of trouble. Knight f6 is even worse. You just simply take rook c8 and look at that pawn center. Oh my God. And the bishop gets trapped alternatively on a6. So this is absolutely no bueno for white, not playable. The only logical response is knight f4. And what we do here is the following. We take the knight, and this is where white's main problem will come to the fore, which is the fact that the king is still uncastled. Rook c8 tempo. And now we have got two moves. If bishop f3, then we score a tempo on the queen in order to open up the e file. And now I'm going to surprise you because we are not going to cash in on e file businesses. Instead, we are going to pull an absolutely spectacular tactics. Boomshki, rook takes c3. That is some brutal stuff. BC check, and now note that the king can't go to either of these squares because check would pick off the queen due to the discovery. And now likewise, after bishop takes a1, the knight cannot retake the bishop on account of the check, winning the queen again. So they go bishop d5. Note that if queen g4 check, we can just pull the bishop back and block the check and win. Whereas after bishop d5, we just pull the bishop back, and the white king is utterly exposed. Meanwhile, we are also up a pawn. As good as it gets. Queen f3 is the more common method to play this, but here too, our tactical chances will come to the fore again. D5, disconnecting queen and bishop. And now we are going to go again on a bit of a chasey. It's actually a better move here than rook b8. Bishop takes and d4. So the idea is to keep on striking the iron while it's hot, which in this case clearly translates to while the king is in the middle. Right away you see why rook c7 was a better choice than rook b8, as now we have got enhanced pressure on the c file, which rook b8 wouldn't have allowed. Castles, I think it's the wisest call to cut the losses and castle out of this absolute nightmare. But now, of course, white has to pay a hefty price, and that hefty price is that they are losing material. If a queen goes to e2, then to defend the knight, we have bishop c4 at the very least, whereas on queen d1, we just win a piece, and the game is over. So, what that really means is that knight c2 is not really playable because here white is already in a world of hurt. So, in order to fix this, we can do two things. We can either castle or we can play EF, and by we, I mean them. So if they castle, you immediately understand why our response here is F4 and not FE. And actually, this is the Spassky game, so I stand corrected that I was thinking of. Here, this is not good, because after F5, knight F4, EF, bishop takes, now none of our tricks work really well, because the king is castled, and consequently, it's safe. So this is your way of remembering when to take e4 and when to push past. So if the king is castled, then all of these tactics will not work to our favor because the king is already safe on g1. And so now we instead need to opt to push past. And now we are basically going to prepare for a second wave of f5. All right, two lines, rooks to d1, either of them. If rook a d1, we play a preparatory king h8. It tends to be a very handy move to play, securing the king on a dark square. Sometimes the g file is going to be handy for the rooks. And pretty much no matter what white does next, we're going to send it with f5. For example, g3, f5. Bishop c2. Now, I looked at this line before I started the recording, and I didn't find anywhere any reference to what happens if EF. So I want to show you this because I think most people would be scared of this. The idea is that after EF, bishop d5, f6, it looks super scary because there is a mate threat down here. And g7 is hanging with check. But we have a very, very handy remedy against this that solves all of our problems. We casually play bishop h6, and after queen h6, rook a7 stops both checkmates and threatens to take this, swing the rook to g7, and we are going to be, again, the aggressors on the king side. So remember this. It's actually not a trainable line. Maybe we'll add it later, I don't know. But it's important to note that EF doesn't work. But I think for a human, that's the scary move that you would want to clarify what to do against. So the computer moves supposedly best is bishop c2, but this doesn't really create any problems for us. We take g3, we play bishop f7. This is a very common move in this line that before we commit to taking either on d5 or e4 or some kind of a change in structure, we first have a go at that queen to chase it to a less attractive square, which in this case is h3. Note that f5 is not capturable because of bishop d5. And the queen hangs. And now we go for f4. GF, this is a stock standard pawn sack that we've seen already many, many times. The idea is that we simply want to blast the king side open, where we have more pieces and better placed pieces. Yeah. Here after the check, like for example, king h1 is already a losing move. King f1, bishop e8, followed by bishop d7, and black has got a dream Sveshnikov where both of these pieces are merely assisting to the carnage that is ongoing on the king's side, or I should say that they are mere observers of the carnage. Whereas the healthier looking king h1 is actually just outright losing. Bishop a6, queen e3. I believe if takes, it's queen h4. I hope I'm right about this. Yeah, and even here, queen h4, and the attack is just unstoppable. Look at this. Bishop d1 and bang. Wow. Check, check. And the game is over. What? Look at that. This is the stockfish line. So once again, we play bishop e6. Queen e6 is not even covered, but I'm near certain that it's going to be a similar queen h4 idea, hitting the rook and coming in with some really, really, really feisty threats. Rook doubling is now going to be easily accessible. It looks like absolute misery. And after queen e3, queen h4, we just go full Monty, bishop h3, and the threat is bishop takes h2. Wowzers! That is madness. King can't take because bishop f1 is mate in 2. Rook has to take. Check now. The rook can't take because it's pinned. King here, bishop e4. And see, yeah. Wouldn't want to be a king f1. We take the rook and they can't take the bishop on account of mate. Welcome to the Sicilian Sveshnikov. Wow. Right on. So that was rook a d1. And rook f d1 is not going to be much different. King h8 again. Knight c2. White is trying to bring the knight back in. We have seen this many a time, and we don't care. f5. Same goes for the EF ideas. We just defend everything with the rook on a7. And if a4, now we go for our favorite bishop f7, kicking the queen. And if queen e2, then we change the structure. And we have seen this structure already too. Opposite colored bishops, the king side pawn mass for black is just go, 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 go. Kill, 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 kill. AB, e4, bishop, rook a6. It's probably the best practical chance here is to give up the piece and count the pawns. And we go like, not interested yet. And now GF obviously allows us to bite into that king even harder with knight g6, knight f4. So white actually can't even take on f3. They are forced to play queen e3. And now we take knight e4, trying to jump into e6, f4. Queen d3, take, king g8. And again, the story is quite similar to the ones that we have already observed multiple times in this line. White has a lot of pawns, but that white king is not as safe as it would like to be. Two lines. If queen e4, knight g6, queen f3, take, queen b6, and now we start taking pawns. c4, knight e5. The piece activity is always off the charts in the Sveshnikov. It's so good. Queen h5, queen a6, and it's very clear that it's going to be white who will have to find a way to draw this game. The constantly looming threat of pawn f3 is super annoying for white to deal with. The other main line here is GF, or rather I should say the main line is GF, or move 26, main line. Knight g6, and again the knight on e5 is going to be an absolute menace. Queen g5, rook takes, rook g1, queen f5, and here white needs to do something urgently, so b6 makes perfect sense. King f7, we are unpinning the knight, and now we are going to go into perpetual check. Take, and unfortunately we can't do better than that, but I'm still happy. Okay, so if after bishop f7 the queen goes back to h3 per main line, then we take, and knight e7 again. This is just our favorite modus operandi. If we can trade on d5 and they can't retake with a piece, we warmly embrace this scenario. If it costs a pawn on b5, we can't care less. And again, there is a super dangerous attack incoming from black, relying on the kingside pawn mass. e3 is a pending threat. Knight g6, knight e5 is coming. The g file is easily accessible for the black rook. Just a jolly good time for us. And that, ladies and gents, brings us to the final variation of the non-castling scenarios. We are looking at the move EF, which again might be the one that you go like, oh, this looks scary. And here too, my rule of thumb for you, in order to remember this well, is look at the location of the white king. Not yours, the white king. If the white king is in the middle, EF is not dangerous. If it's already castled, then EF is more or less game winning. Let me explain to you the difference. Now we go bishop d5, f6, e4. Take, rook e8. And now white has a problem. And that problem is that queen takes d5 loses to ed3 check, check, and that's it. We call it a day here. White just can't move a piece. Like everything is stuck. The rook on h1 is stuck. The knight on a3 is stuck. Obviously, we'll still have to work to win it, but queen f6, knight g4 is coming, and yeah, white is just on the verge of defeat. And now you understand the importance of white being castled in the same line. After queen d5 ed, this move wouldn't be a check, and white could just capture our knight on c6 and win. So that's your reference point. Right, so one more time. After ef, bishop d5. f6, e4, fg, rook e8, and here the actual two acceptable moves for white are two bishop moves, bishop c2 and bishop e2. Let's begin with bishop c2. Our responses and plans will be almost identical, rook e5. What I want you to observe right away is the incredibly powerful concentration of pieces for us in the center versus the very scattered nature of pieces for white all over the shop. That's what we bank on. If queen h6 insisting on making it look intimidating on the king side, we laugh it off with b4, cb, knight b, castles, rook c8, and yeah, white is already struggling here. a2 hanging, c2 hanging. So bishop b3 is best advised. Trade, d5. And the central pawns are quite menacing. And again, this poor knight on a3, the Sveshnikov curse, from white's perspective, is a major problem. Recovering g7 is no biggie. Queen g5 or rook g5, whichever is appropriate, is going to easily restore material balance for us. No problems. Main line is queen e2, somewhat more consistent and coherent. b4 again. And here, knight c4 actually allows a very, very nifty tactic for us. Take on c3. When taking on e5 allows a take on b2, and then knight e5, that's insane attacking potential. So white is best advised to refrain from taking on e5, and instead we take on c3 when we trade and rook c5. Now e4 can't be captured because of rook e5, so the queen has to go back. We defend our most beautiful central pawn, and after queen f6, now we look to pick off c3, we pick up g7, and we go from pawn down to pawn up. Good stuff. And so, the main line, bishop e2, knight e5, castles, and queen f6. Once again, beautiful piece concentration. Now, two moves, three even. If knight c2, cheeky tactics, check. Takes. Obviously, gf, ef is not going to be a pretty sight, so let's not do that. Yeah, let's do that actually. I want to show you. It's not part of the trainable, but this check is made on G2. So hence bishop takes f3, and then we go in between rook e5, optimizing our piece positioning before capturing on f3. Now, if queen g4, you can further perfect the situation and take with the queen and deliver a really awesome checkmate down there. So knight e1 is advised, but after queen h5, we still have a very, very potent attack ongoing. So yeah, this is looking very, very, very dangerous indeed. I'm wondering what's wrong here with rook g2. Rook g2, knight g2, and e3. This move's very, very, very winning for black. I will have a look at this. But queen h5 is our recommendation. What's going on here that I'm missing? Yeah, I don't know. So queen h5. And even here, we have got a very dangerous attack. But I will have a look at the rook g2 base in a bit. Right. So queen h3, obviously, I mean, no one would play queen g4 here to sign up for further bashing. So queen h3 makes perfect sense. Takes knight e3. This is way, way more sensible than the previous line was. Takes g2, rook d1. And this is the point when we need to stop and reflect on the humorous umbrella pawns on both sides. It's not every day that you see a position where both kings have one pawn wedged in from the enemy camp, sheltering or shielding that king. Bishop f3, rook d4, rook e8. Speaking of which, by the way, I don't really think that I need to explain which king is feeling safer in these scenarios. a4, rook e6, covering d6. And after AB, we are basically following here a ICCF, Internet Correspondence Chess game. And yeah, we're looking fine. If they capture A8 is covered, so we don't need to worry about the check. And even if that was the case, we could just take G7. H5 can be sent to further secure our king's position. And yeah, we cannot possibly be worse here. So, that's a lot of lines. So one more time. Castle's queen f6, and we just looked at knight c2. If instead rook f d1, we go to d3 this time round. The logic is quite easy to follow. f2 is now vulnerable. We sack the pawn in order to open up the d5 bishop's diagonal. Always remember, though, that this is on. All right, so now queen d5 is not playable because we can take here. But once this is captured, you have to remember or observe that your own bishop is hanging. So rook e5 is needed. We very often rely on these various tempi ideas against the queen. Earlier, I showed you the bishop f7 move from e6 to f7. Now we're looking at multiple rook e5 ideas to ensure that we are safe and that queen gets pushed around. We regain our pawn. And again, this looks like a hot mess. If queen takes, rook e2, b4, and this is going to fizzle out. This is going to fizzle out. We're down a pawn, but the knight on a3 is terrible. Yeah, this is not going to be losable at all. In fact, at times white will have actually serious difficulty with the knight on a3. The main line is rook d6 when we trade like so, but it's almost an identical scenario where, again, g7 will be recuperated easily, and the knight on a3 is an eternal problem for white, which is going to prevent them from being able to play for a win. And thus, we arrive at the main line, queen h3. Knight g6. We are headed for f4. And white should play queen e3. If rook fd1, then we throw in b4 for extra measure, just to pester a little bit them on b2. Now if knight c2, knight f4, this is going to be all kinds of awesomeness for us. We are winning on the king side, we're winning on the queen side. What more could we ask for? This was Arjun Erigasi against Pragnananda, by the way. So yeah, some heavy hitting business going on there. So probably better is CB, at least according to the mighty fish, when we throw in another pawn sack. Now this disconnects the queen from the knight on the third, so that when we take on b2, we are actually hanging two pieces instead of just one. Very smart. Bishop g4, rook e5. Note that d5 is still hanging, so we need to ensure that we secure our pieces before we start cherry picking. Now, the only decent way to defend the knight on a3 is e4, which allows knight f4, and all of a sudden now white is falling apart with g2 under attack by 2, plus the bishop on d5 bearing down on that pawn as well. This is spelling disaster, and a3 is still completely unplayable. So actually, yeah, knight c2, I would say, was the better move as per played by Arjun here, and takes is really, really not that great. Okay, so back to queen e3. Queen is going on a fair bit of a journey here. Now we go knight h4. The reason why we go to h4 here and not f4 is because from here we hit g2. We are keeping an eye on the check. And if push comes to shove, we can also jump back to f5 again, pestering the queen on e3. King h1 is our main line. If rook d1, rook e5, evergreen theme. And sacking the exchange is already probably called for, since rook g5 ideas looked mighty dangerous. And it makes sense to secure both of the rocks and forcing an endgame scenario, endgame-ish scenario, where we are up an exchange, but our king is now a little bit vulnerable, so we need to play a few precise moves. We pick off a b2 pawn. The engine thinks it's equal, but there's a lot of play left in the position. This is not one of those lines that I'm going to close off with, yeah, it's equal that, but we are having all the fun. Here it's dynamic equilibrium, and we are not necessarily having the more fun here, because once again, we constantly have to watch and worry about our king. But nonetheless, there is no immediate threats, no anything incoming really. So I would just say that the longer it goes on, the more likely it's going to turn out to our favor. So on that note, king h1 is our main line. Rook e5, we know how this rolls. Knight c2 and rook e8, because we still follow basic chess principles, even if we are following opening theory into move 22. Developing all of our pieces, bringing everybody toward the center. And our final branch, unless I'm mistaken, rook d1 or knight d4. If rook d1, this feels bad-ish on account of abandoning f2. So knight f5, now the queen has to stay around, and we immediately jump on said f2. Rook d5 exchange sack again feels forced. Take, knight e3. The pin is a bit awkward. Rook c5, g4. Pin is awkward. Queen h6. Always tactics when it comes to feeling in trouble. Queen g6, we defend the knight. Note that, of course, the knight was not capturable because the queen was on, and if they took the queen, we take back with the knight. Bishop d3. It's been a fair while since we were in a pin, and now we are using counter-tactical measures to resolve our problems. Fe and knight g3 check. And in the end of this chaotic variation, now white has got beautiful triple G pawns, 4 isolated pawns. We have got 3 isolated pawns. We will recuperate G7, after which material will be level, and it's very unlikely that either side should lose that resulting position. And so our main line is 94, 93. Tactics time. Sadly, they don't have to take, which, by the way, is a key point behind why King H1 is an important move here, because it simply sidesteps the knight f3 check so that it never comes with a tempo. And so white can just ignore us for the time being at least. But now we are going after checkmate. Never hurt anyone. And now we are doing our typical Sveshnikov, we are going to checkmate you agenda. Knight takes is forced. And now white manages just by the skin of their teeth to somehow lessen the pressure due to the e5 pin. But the show is not over yet. Bang. Check. And rook e6. And believe it or not, and I'm still coming to terms with this whole story, but apparently here, after rook d5, rook g6, queen g5 is fine. Rook g5 allows mate. Like, that's game over. Thanks for coming. But queen g5, ef is actually balanced according to Stockfish. And I'm still just, it's so hard to believe that there is no mate here. Yeah. In our evaluation, we say that ultimately, likely one side or the other will have to force a perpetual check, which once again is a success as far as I'm concerned on the back of a black repertoire. But yeah, it's just like, what? No, wait. Oh, well, it is what it is. Even in the Sveshnikov, we can't checkmate in every single variation. And that, ladies and gentlemen, concludes the tactical bishop d3 without castling on move 12. In fact, I will go back all the way to that so that I can set us up for the next chapter, which, believe it or not, is going to be castles on move 12 right here. So that is what awaits for us in the next chapter.